For those that are joining us through Zoom, welcome. Others through Facebook and YouTube, it's a live stream. Those in Zoom, you can chat with us. You can ask questions. There's a Q&A function. If you prefer and want us to know who you are, just type a few lines into the chat room and say who you are and what you're doing. I want to welcome, this is Plan C Live, kind of the idea of a civic response, particularly the type of maker response we're seeing to COVID-19. And today we have a group with a wonderful name, Something Labs, both ambiguous and particular in a nice way. We have Sam and Peter and Brian. We have Ada, Yokonobu, Angela, and Lily. We have to at least acknowledge Lily. Lily, could you start us off and tell us where you are? I think in all of this, we've never had someone in full PPE on Plan C Live. So welcome, Lily.
Sure. Hi. Hello, everybody. I'm going to speak up so that you can hear me underneath my N95 mask. I am calling in from a field clinic tent that is located in San Francisco. And this was a tent that was put up as an alternative site to our emergency rooms so that we can help offload some of the ERs during the surge. So I work here a couple of times per week. This is extra from my normal ER shifts. I normally am a physician at San Francisco General Hospital as well as the California PAC medical system. And so this has been a fun experience for me to see how they set up an alternative site. It's basically a tent. Let me just show you guys briefly the outside, and then I'll take you inside. I am in a parking lot next to a clinic, and they have set up this negative pressure tent. And this is where we're able to receive ambulance traffic. I'll take you inside the tent here. There is actually no patients here right now, but we are prepared to have at least 12 patients in this tent. We have everything from defibrillators. We have the ability to put breathing tubes into somebody. We have oxygen tanks, full capacity here to take care of COVID patients.
And so, this is down in the Embarcadero?
This is actually in Bayview.
Oh, Bayview, okay.
Medical clinic.
Okay.
And the good news that I can share here is the tent is empty. I've seen only 2 patients here today. Here in San Francisco, we're actually doing a very good job of having the COVID levels stay relatively low. And so thankfully this tent hasn't gotten very much use over the past couple of weeks.
Oh, that's great
and the last thing I just want to show you is this face shield that I'm wearing. You may not even be able to tell that I'm wearing a face shield, but this was a face shield that was designed and manufactured and distributed by the team at Something Labs.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, thank you. Well, Sam, let me introduce you and tell us how again, Lily, thank you very much for that tour. That's really amazing. And thank you for being on this program. And thank you for doing what you do. But let me throw it over to Sam and tell us a bit of how Something Labs came into being. You're on mute.
Unmute.
Oh, yes.
There we go.
Pardon me. Hi, everyone. My name's Sam, and I'm delighted to be here. My main role at this point is just head cheerleader of everybody else who are doing all the real amazing work. And I'm going to show you photos of them because I love them. So bear with me for just a moment. And we're going to share in. Can everyone see this?
Mm-hmm.
Whoops,
Yeah.
started a little bit ahead.
Okay.
All right, let's go to the beginning. Great, here we are. So this story does start with Lily. I happen to live with Lily. A couple of us live with Lily. And the story really starts with health workers for all of this. Lily, as she said, works at SF General. And she is very well connected to many other ER physicians, nurses, and health workers. And I saw photos that she shared with us from around the country of what they were using for PPE. Here's a folder divider held up with two scrunchies. And you've probably seen things like this since. Actually, in the maker spirit, this is wonderful. People are self-organizing to protect themselves. And we thought that we could do something to help. So a couple of us worked down at the Exploratorium museum, a science museum in San Francisco, which had just shut down. And we thought, well, we have a shop and we have truly nothing to do. People don't really work from home. And so along with the shop voting to donate all of our PPE, Angela, who's here, made this prototype that can be made in only about 2 minutes of machine time to make a face shield. Since then, many people have made incredible things like this, and also during that time. But the Exploratorium was fresh. It was fresh for us, and we had just begun. And they let me kind of choose a dream team of people to work with. Initially, Angela, who's on this call, came on. Gaia, another engineer. Elisa, whose first day at the Exploratorium was shelter in place, but had just come from medical engineering. And Peter Taylor, who's over here getting intubated by Dr. Andy Tenner over at SF General to test out an intubation box. We initially thought, okay, people need to know how to make one. People need stuff. So we took our handsomest housemate, Michael, to make a video. We started making kits, how-to videos, found machinists and fabricators who were able to make these at scale. One of
Sam, I don't think your screen is sharing anymore.
Oh no, am I done?
So we missed Peter being intubated. I was looking for that photo.
Uh-oh, am I no longer sharing?
You were.
I saw it on my side.
Yeah.
You saw it? Okay.
What about now?
Now I see it.
Now we can see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So there's Peter let's go back. There's Peter in a box.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah. And then, so back to the handsome housemate, Michael. A video for everyone to see, kitting up things and sending parts out for people distributed since we couldn't be together to make parts all over. Volunteer crews came out of everywhere, whether it's a solo person, an entire house, groups of people of all sorts, just trying to participate and do something together. One of the amazing volunteer that we found in all of this was Brian, who's on this call, who turned over his home shop entirely to this and has done all sorts of amazing things, making molds, making parts, prototyping, iterating. Here he is fixing a PAPR device. One of my favorites is initially there was a question to the Science Museum, like, is it true you're going to be using kid labor for this? Since kids often do come to the museum, and we're like, no. Well, it turns out we are, but they're adorable and they write really great notes for health workers. And it's amazing that everyone can do this together.
That's great.
The delivery moments feel really special. They vary, of course, from orchestrated band photos to just quiet stories exchanged with people who are working on everything from hospitals to senior care centers to direct services that need them. As soon as we started with face shields, every time we talked to a health worker, we found that we learned another thing that people needed. One of the big ones was the story of PAPRs and PAPRs. PAPR stands for Powered Air-Purifying Respirator, a way that you could safely be in a COVID ward but breathe fresh air. Another one was intubation boxes for a particularly risky procedure, both for the patient but also for exposure for health workers. And this is us working with UCSF. Here's me in a gown. And you would think that everything's going swimmingly, but if you zoom in, that's somebody who hasn't slept in a while. And eventually with all of this, my housemates started to realize that I couldn't go on like this alone. And so they stepped in and stepped up. And like all self-organizing, made a GoFundMe. Edda, who's on this call, has been unbelievably connected, having access to thousands of hospitals, able to call them for what they need. She's working with a team of people who are trying to be in constant contact. Here she is at our home. Yuki, who's also on this call, has led a absolute fleet of volunteer drivers and mailers and even by plane to coordinate PPE beyond us around the country. And what it did is it allowed us to do a lot more. It allowed us to make an assembly line filled with music and food, but for PAPRs to be able to make a lot more. It allowed us to do a lot more in deliveries and be able to serve a lot more people. And in the top right, have time to do art while we worked. That's all the flapper peels left over. And it allowed us to be able to learn about other things that people needed. Here's Gaia walking away with $20,000 worth of gear, like a reverse Santa, to bring home to fix out of a nearby hospital. On the top right is a ventilator manifold that needed replication. And in the bottom right is impermeable gowns, which are in short supply. It also allowed us to just visit more hospitals. Here we are visiting Kaiser Oakland. It allowed us to connect people in the bottom, trying to hook up 3D printers with dentists who need Bellis face masks, to make parts like in the bottom right for capper shields. And then the top right, Elisa.
Explain what capper is, Sam.
Oh, yeah. So PAPRs and cappers are kind of one and the same. Capper is just kind of a helmet version of these air purifying respirators. It's a way that you go in and you have all of your air come in through a fan that passes through a viral filter, and then it pours over your face before leaving, so that any air that you breathe while wearing them has passed through this filter for guaranteed clean. Yeah, but we'll go into more of that later. So all these people, I mean, we came together informally, and I'm gonna stop talking after this, but it's been an amazing, especially in this time of isolation, a way to kind of change anxiety into dedication and try to bring people together to do something. And so that is our crew. That's what I got.
That's great. Well, where should we start? Should we start with Brian? Just because he's in the upper left-hand corner here of my grid anyway. Brian, you have a shop. Do you live in your shop, or is your shop off your home, or what is it?
Yeah, basically I've been looking for a shop for quite a while, and I always thought I'd build out like some living space, you know, in the shop and live that way. And then I was lucky enough to find this place where there's actually a house on the roof. It's kind of this weird San Francisco thing where it used to be a Coca-Cola bottling company, and I guess someone in management wanted their house on the roof. So that's where I live now. It's kind of a great setup. I just trot downstairs and go to work in the morning. So I feel pretty lucky about that.
That's great. And what kind of things prior to the COVID-19 were you doing in your shop?
Yeah, it's really funny. I feel like I've been my most productive in COVID. You kind of need a reason to get stuff done when you're working on your own projects. It's kind of like, you know, I'll get to it whenever. But my big excuse was building bicycles. So I have mostly metalworking equipment here. I have a wood shop as well, but welding bicycle frames, putting those together, which actually means I just spend all my time building jigs to build bicycles, or jigs to make jigs to build bicycles.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And how did you connect to Sam and others at Something Labs? Do you live with them? No, I think you're in a separate place.
Oh, I'm maybe one of the people that doesn't live in that house.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was really, it was awesome. I think just kind of random, you know, it was a good, I think, a few days of research just to get through all the chaos down to some people that were working with hospitals. And you know, I could trust that we were building things that were in need, that were going to be used, that were to spec. And there was a group, Open Source Medical Supplies, that I started looking at, and they were doing local organization. I got connected to All Bay Area PP and was going through that Slack, which was a lot going on as well. And then Sam grabbed me and he's like, "Oh, you have in CNC? Let's make some of these visors." And we started going from there. And then it's been really great getting to work with a little bit of a tighter knit group that's well connected, moving really fast, and you know is doing good work. So it's been such a relief for me that you can just go to work and hammer some stuff out and feel confident in it.
Yeah, good. Angela, you had worked at the Exploratorium with Sam. So we have some of you have the Exploratorium connections, and you, Sam, you explained you worked in exhibit design. Did you work in the same department or somewhere else?
Yeah, so I'm on the same team as Sam and had been at the Exploratorium for 2 weeks before shelter in place. So was just getting to know Peter, Gaia, Lisa, and Sam through this experience, but I'm really excited to have gotten pulled in, and it's kind of a fun weekend after the shelter in place announcement where Sam and I were like rapidly scrambling to put together prototypes. And it's since evolved so much into this incredibly organized team. So it's magical.
What did you think of you were getting involved in the beginning, and what does it look like now? I mean, how much has it changed?
Well, in the beginning, it was, a small group of us kind of living off of the kind will of our employers, and just trying to pull together as much as we could with the resources that we had. I think it's been really amazing through Sam and the rest of this group's network to see it expand to such an organized effort, coordinated effort. And I think one of the most magical things has been our link to the healthcare workers that has allowed us to actually kind of like rapidly prototype and get feedback about our designs. So that's been the most exciting thing for me, as well as, of course, the larger organization, and everybody's so willing to pitch in.
Right. Well, let me welcome Lily. Looks like you're in a different location, maybe inside somewhere. You're on mute there. There we go.
Left the tent. I'm back in the clinic so I can breathe a little bit. And,
and we get to see you a little bit. That's nice. More. That's great. How did you connect into this group? Oh, you were also, you said earlier, you're a roommate of Sam's, but yes, that doesn't necessarily require you to be part of what he was doing.
Well, that's my main connection, actually. It was at the mid-March when COVID was really starting to hit the United States, and I was very alarmed by the lack of PPE that my colleagues were experiencing. And to me, it was terrifying, and seeing that their supply chain wasn't working.
Right.
And so it was spending several nights after that first day that I came home with this fear, talking to Sam and Etta and Hannah and Michael and Matt all in our house about what we as a team could do. And that's really when this all sprung. And so it's been a wonderful experience for me to be part of it, because I have been able to provide real-time feedback to the engineers and actually see my suggestions change the product within a couple of hours. And I have to say, it's made me look very good at work, because everyone is so excited about the different PPE that's coming in, and they also have been able to provide feedback. It's been a really great community experience for us.
That's what I think is one of the unique things is the actually close loop between the people making things and the people using them, and being able to go back and forth, and everybody's learning from each other, and it isn't just get something off the shelf and get to like it. It's like, hey, could this be better?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's also something to be said for the environment, obviously at San Francisco General, of like being willing to sort of do that, right? So I think not every hospital has been as receptive with kind of providing feedback. I think that's changing, and I think more hospitals now have, physicians on staff and other staff members that are seeing what can be done and working with people in the community. But I think the reality is, most people in the community that want to help don't necessarily have a medical background. So it's really crucial to have somebody on the inside that's actually the end user, right? In terms of having a good engineering process, to make sure that there's that iteration. So I think that's really, when I learned about this project, I was really excited. And that I was like, wow, it's really cool that you're getting these sort of rapid cycles of iteration. I didn't really realize that you were a roommate though. So now I see why it was much easier. That there's nowhere to go. They can't,
they can't get away from each other. Let's bring in Peter. Peter, can you talk a little bit about your role on this project?
Hi, Peter Taylor. I work with Sam and Angela and Elisa at the Exploratorium. Was brought in early on, and initially it was just a matter of like, how do we take the Budman mask design, which was a 3D printed design, still is a 3D printed design, and how do we make these faster? Angela is like, we can laser cut these. We can go from a 5-hour print time down to 3 minutes. And I'm like, yep, we can do that. And so she had the laser cutter down, and I'm like, well, we could also CNC these. So let's have compatible designs that will also allow different manufacturing processes to create interchangeable parts. So laser cuttable, CNCable, 3D printable, everything works together. So that was just another way to do it. It's maybe a little faster, maybe a little less handwork to do that. But when people, based on what facilities people have available, they should be able to use those tools to make an impact. So that was kind of the first thing that I was involved in on this project. Towards the end of our first week, Sam apparently had feedback, and hospitals were asking for intubation boxes. And he pointed me at a couple of links for intubation boxes. I'm like, all right, we can make those too. No problem. Came up with a design that was sort of had fingers and slots, so you could flat pack it, nested nicely on a CNC, and was really adjustable. So there's within the CAD model, you change a couple of things and everything snap, 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 and everything changes up. And we made something like 9 versions of that. I started working on it on like a 2 p.m. on Friday. We had a prototype by 5, and we showed that prototype to someone. I forget if it was the same day or if it was the next day, but like within hours, we had this in front of an ER nurse.
So rapid, right?
Which is the thing that we can do. That's the cool thing about being able to try that. And then we got a bunch of feedback, and that was V1, and we're on V3.5 right now.
That's great.
So lots of different things.
Thanks, Peter. We'll get back to that. Etta, can we bring you in? I think you are kind of in this really important role. If you have a bunch of makers, and you have a bunch of places out in the community that have demand for what they're doing, how you put those the demand and the supply together, right?
Yeah. I think most of my work has been at a high level. How do we bring these awesome devices that these amazing engineers are making, and how do we bring it to the field? How do we get it into the hands of healthcare workers and hospitals? And a lot of my work has focused a little bit actually outside of hospital work. I've been trying to think through an equitable approach of how to get, with a focus on face shields, how to get these into the hands of healthcare workers in nursing homes and smaller community clinics, hospices. So that has been really awesome for us. I think what we were hearing from a lot of these places is they just don't have access. People aren't really thinking about them as much as they are the ERs, right, and the ICUs.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the main things that I was trying to address. And so I think we have actually been really successful at doing that.
Are those still considered clinical settings, or are they more community settings in terms of the requirements for masks and things?
I guess I would have to ask Lily for what she thinks about that.
Okay.
I would say still clinical settings.
Yeah, okay.
A lot of the people that are wearing the face shields and things are people who are providing clinical services.
Right. Okay. And I think you're also connected to Get Us PPE, or Could you talk a little bit about their role?
Yeah. So Matt and I were actually working really closely. We both work for Get Us PPE as well. And so that has been an amazing resource for us. Get Us PPE is the biggest national organization that is matching PPE to healthcare facilities that are in need. So they have been doing an amazing job at linking people that have donations to places that need it close by. And the way that we have been using them locally in the Bay Area is they have basically a list of healthcare facilities that need PPE. And we basically access that list, and we do targeted outreach to places that are, like I mentioned, the nursing homes, the hospices, the smaller clinics. And so we confirm with them how many they need. And then that's how we match Yuki, who is also on the call. He is an amazing distribution, the king of distribution, I would say. And so we basically, I lead a team of volunteers where we're doing outreach to these places. And then Yuki and his team of volunteers basically match all of that PPE to the places that we have identified that have a need. So that has been, I think the thing that is really unique for this group is we have really amazing dedicated volunteers that are making amazing products. And we also have a team of people that are dedicated to outreach, to identifying the need, to getting really quick feedback, and then doing those deliveries. So I think all of those things together have really allowed us to have a huge impact in the Bay Area.
That's great. Thanks. Well, let's bring in Yuki if we can here to, you are, I understand, sort of working with medical students and others to build a delivery network from a pickup and drop off network. Talk about that.
Yeah, so we initially started out kind of different from Something Labs back in late March, where these medical students that I knew had these PPE collection drives. So we're collecting from the community and then identifying clinics and hospitals to deliver it to. So we're hitting maybe 20 clinics around Stanford, which I'm based. And then since then, we've kind of built up a larger distribution network of distributing a lot of donated PPE from manufacturers, and then now moving on to helping out Something Labs as well. So I work closely with Etta, talk to her all day, and then we identify facilities that we need to get things delivered, whether it's face shields or some other things to hospitals, the PAPRs that Sam was talking about. And then I have a team of 30 just amazing med school students that are willing to drive all the way from Palo Alto to North Bay to wherever to deliver PPE to whoever needs them.
That's amazing. And are these larger deliveries? I mean, it's not like a single thing. They're taking a bulk load?
It's everything in between, actually.
Yeah.
We'll deliver anything that needs moving. So anything from a little sample that fits in your hand to thousands of PAPR shields, which are really heavy. So I've gone everything from loading up my Forex expedition with boxes to just having a few samples in there and grabbing everything in between.
That's great. Well, Sam, let me throw it back to you. I think one of the things that's unusual about this project is the number of different things you've produced. It's almost like there's a menu that you can have one of these and one of those, and we're working on something else. So how did, some of it was coming from just engaging with the hospitals and hearing back from the network that there were other needs, right?
Yeah, that's right. It really did start with face shields, and that was such a natural start of like, can we hold plastic in front of somebody's face? And there have been so many good solutions. And then the reason it moved from there is the very first new one was about PAPRs, and it was a health worker who brought one of them out and said, "This is a lens cleft. It looks like you guys can like cut plastic." And we're going to run out of these in a week. And if you can make even 2, it's worth slipping you this one out of the back of the hospital. And so it just started that way. And what's been amazing about this team is that there's this kind of movement of, it starts with this like prototyping, like it goes to Lily, it goes back to Angela, it goes to Peter, it goes to Guy, it goes back to Lily's friend, it goes to somebody else. And it keeps running there. And as soon as we get something that seems useful, I can start moving up through Brian, and then through me helping with manufacturing, and then Eda talking, and then Yuki moving. And so everything kind of has this different place in its lifespan, and everybody's kind of working at this one part of it, which is really beautiful. Like, Peter and Angela and Gaia and Elisa, who aren't on this call, the best is to just keep them moving on. Like as soon as they figured it out, the most recent one was a ventilator breathing circuit. It's like, all right, leave it behind. We'll take care of the rest. Keep going. And so that's why it kind of has this menu-like feel as we keep trying to push things. And then eventually the after us section is hoping that larger institutions will take it on, and that we can step out of the way. That's the dream for all of it. We're just trying to disappear.
Yeah. Are you seeing any changes? Maybe this is a question for you. Are you seeing a change in demand, even in the Bay Area? Like either it's satisfied in some ways, or is it still growing, or it's moving?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are seeing some shifts in demand. I think one of the things, face shields is one that a lot of the bigger hospital systems are somehow finding supply for. I don't know about what supply that necessarily is, but a lot of the feedback that we have been getting from the bigger healthcare facilities is that they have found supply for face shields. I think that this is because this is something that maker organizations around the country are taking on really effectively. I think it's something that a lot of people have gotten behind, and so there is a supply for that. However, what we have noticed is that there are certain things that there is no supply chain for yet. PAPRs is a really good example. Those, I think in the Bay Area, we are one of the only suppliers of that. So a lot of the hospitals that we're talking to are, they are looking to us for supply.
Yeah. And any idea
as well?
Is anybody, I mean, one of the things I'm interested in is like, I know the supply chain's broken in a lot of places and it comes from China and some other things, but I'm just interested in like, well, where would they normally get them? At what rate would they use them? And like, how badly broken is it? You know, is it a big miss or a little one? We don't know the answers, but entirely, but I'll throw it out in case any of you have been looking into it.
It's hard to know. I think sometimes, you know, people are jumping on to try to get a good bit because they know that this problem is gonna last for a very long time. So, you know, big healthcare systems are buying large amounts, right? Where before they did not need that many N95s. They didn't need that many face shields. Like I think we were talking with Lily last night. Face shields have not typically been something that all healthcare professionals wear, but now it's something that every healthcare professional, along with other people, you know, not healthcare professionals, everybody's looking for them. So it's just, there's a need where before there wasn't.
Right. That's interesting. I know I talked to a dentist yesterday that they're really looking for it. And in parts of the country, they were restricted from using PPE because it was a non-critical use. Sam, we had a good question from Diane here. You started to answer it a little bit on here about how the organization, was this kind of an emergent or a planned organization? I would guess it's mostly emergent, but after a point you have to start planning for it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the point of this organization has never been to last. So that helps a lot. We're all just trying to write ourselves out of a job. But in doing that, sometimes in the meantime, a lot of things come from, oh my gosh, this person has so much. Can we find somebody else who can help? And so some of it has been like, we need a treasurer. Sam's horrible at this. And then somebody comes on, they're not on this call.
Yeah.
And others have been like, somebody like Brian walks into our lives and is like the godsend we were all hoping for. And like Yuki too, whereas like, yeah, meeting them was just such a pleasure, and whatever they do is the right thing. And that's true for so many.
You guys are also kind to each other and supportive. That's remarkably great.
We all love each other very much.
That comes across. That's wonderful. You know, Brian or Sam rather, there's just a thing that I wish that there was a category somehow for this kind of organization, you know, that sort of ramps up to do something, and it's almost like a project rather than an organization. But it's not recognized, and like for raising money or things like that. On my call early with Germany, is that the government was giving out money to various groups producing PPE, but you had to be a for-profit company to receive the money. And it's just sort of like this all falls through the cracks in a lot of different ways.
Sorry to interrupt real quick. I actually have to go. We have 3 patients come in. But thank you so much for having me, everyone. It was a pleasure to be part of this.
Yeah.
Bye, Lily.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, Lil.
Yeah. Do you have other medical personnel involved? So you don't overtax Lily?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Poor Lily having to do these double jobs, and all these health workers too are doing amazing double jobs, really. You know, they go to work and they have to do their normal shift, but they're also self-organizing. They're also advocating. There are a lot of people in these maker groups who are also health workers. What's been really special, and Edda's worked on so many of these relationships, and so have Angela and Peter, and Yuki and Brian. And the whole team of usually as soon as we work with somebody and give them a bunch of stuff, then we can ask them about the next thing and ask them about more things. And so, for instance, right now with every PAPR delivery, we're just sneaking in a gown and be like, do you like this? And that's been just such
Kind
a
of
useful
fries with
network.
your.
That's a great model. That's like a gift with purchase.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's been really sweet. And getting to meet all of these people that we have no right to meet has been like such an amazing thing.
That's great. Now, Peter, you mentioned on the chat, talk about Boston Scientific picking up production of things. And I think, we have heard this, and sometimes it is, if industry will step up and manufacture something that's been designed here and produce it in larger scale, that's a good thing. So has that happened here in the case of one of the PPE?
Yeah, I'm not the person to speak about that necessarily, but Sam would definitely be the person to know.
Okay.
Yeah, I could. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to talk this much.
That's
and
fine.
Edda too, but I think just a really sweet moment for us was we were on a call. I think Peter and Angela were on it too with Boston Scientific. Of the beginning of them, basically a project manager there saw what we were doing and was like, we're interested. What should we do? What should we think about? And we started talking and planning like, okay, like Brian can make like 100 of these at his shop a day. And this other place can make 500 a day. And they were like, oh yeah, but we're gonna make like 1 million. And so they took some designs and took all of that, and they're like, this is a funny phone call because we're kind of breaking up with you. And what it was is just they're this huge machine, which is amazing and beautiful. And I think in a moment that could have been bittersweet, it was just sweet for this organization of just like, yes, like you did it, you stepped up, this is wonderful. And as many of those moments as possible, the merrier.
And their reach is amazing.
Yes.
They've been able to fulfill, so back to what Etta was saying about equity. They've reached out, and we had a shipment go to Navajo Nation. Like they're different. They're able to fill at a different scale than the makers can, and I think it's a really great way to think about. Sometimes we think about maker and manufacturer and sort of like the divide there, but I think this is a really great like sort of harmony of, okay, you guys have done a great job of prototyping, getting us a design that works, that we know the healthcare workers really can use, that's already had that iterative cycle, and then now we're ready to put it on our line and make it in mass so that we can get it out to as many people as possible. And I think it's just a really great success story, and part of the reason why that face shields aren't needed anymore is because we have those kinds of partnerships that end up turning into really, really major donations, and it is totally sweet. So I mean, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, so that leads a little bit, Sam, or Edda, you're serving outside the Bay Area. You're delivering, I guess, as you feel like some of the demand here is being met, you are finding other places that you can help out.
Yeah,
Edda, yeah.
I would
Good,
actually,
Edda.
yeah. So one of the amazing things that I'm really proud of our group for taking on. So in the Bay Area, we are noticing that a lot of places are, they have a good supply of PPE compared to other places in the country. And so one thing that I'm really proud of from Something Labs is we recently received a grant through Dorothy and the crew at Get Us PPE to support making these PAPR replacement shields for regions in the country that are underserved and are really struggling with getting PPE. So I think that is just something that I'm so proud of. We have really made a dent in the Bay Area, and to be able to move to parts of the country where they're not as lucky as we are, like in the Bay Area, in other major cities, Chicago, New York, LA, there are a lot of maker movements, right? And the nation of makers, like you guys have, people working all over the place, but some of these places just don't have the same access that we do.
Yeah,
so
I am kind of interested in, what parts of the country don't have this going on. It's kind of like a counter story, but, we see it rising up and affecting places, but I'm also kind of interested why maybe in some, very rural and small areas, but I have a feeling we'll look over this and say, what happened here? Why didn't it work there? So
Well, I think one of the things that's happening is that inequity that happened before COVID is just magnified by COVID. So I think that that's one of the definitive things that we see when we look at patterns of infection and who gets infected and who's dying, and what parts of the country are hit the hardest. It really just recapitulates what we already know about inequity in our country. So I think that, we see that, unfortunately, continue to magnify. And I think the good thing about that, though, is that we can look at previous patterns of inequity and actually predict. And so some of the groups, and I know Edda's involved in this work at Get Us PPE too, some of the groups are actually looking to see, can we predict where the next problem is going to be? And instead of coming in after there's a problem, going in before there's a problem and saying, okay, we can provide you with, these materials so that when it hits you, you're not, left, sort of in the lurch.
Yeah. Well, that's a good pivot to kind of thinking about the future, like what's ahead. Whether, in some ways it's a question about something labs, but about each of you individually. I mean, I think it's remarkable what you've learned to do together, right? And the power of that. And, I think we're in a period where our institutions largely are struggling to respond this way. And yet what I see in these groups is just a high degree of competence. Whether you knew it going in or not, you're really competent at what you do and you pick up new things. And that's something I really want to share with the rest of the world. How can we get more people involved and how can they see themselves as competent at solving problems and giving, really making the world better in a tangible way. So I just love to throw that, what do you see? This, as Dorothy said, this is, medical shortages are kind of the first wave of what's hitting here. We aren't going to just reopen, we have to rebuild. And what are we learning through this about how to address some of the fundamental problems that we have in the world, specifically the United States?
Who wants to take that one?
I know it's a big question.
I nominate Angela.
Angela, go for it.
Angela, that's a good one.
Well, I don't know if I can extrapolate all the way to the entire nation, but I think what I've really learned from this is there's power in people reaching out to their local communities and growing organizations at that scale. And I think one of the amazing things is, when we first started out, I was really overwhelmed with how possibly I could help. It seemed like there was so much to tackle and I didn't really know how to get a foothold in. And then Sam reached out and he created this network and it's just grown so organically. And I think that's really the power that we get to leverage. Just reach out and touch someone nearby who you can help, and don't think about it maybe from a national scale, but approach it at a little bit of a smaller level.
Yeah.
Well, it's like the ethos of your name, right? So do something, the idea of just doing something, one little thing that you can do that makes a total difference, right?
That's a great answer, though. It really is. Let me say there's a question from Sydney Richardson in the group. Has there been any response or acknowledgement from the government, local, state, and national, or government agencies for the small labs like you?
I'll bet Dorothy and Edda, yeah, I see Peters. That's kind of the overall emotion. I'll bet Dorothy and Edda have much greater context knowledge for this, but I could just speak very briefly to our minimal involvement, which is that usually whenever we interact with government agencies, it's like a shock of what are you doing here? When we turn up and they're like, what's your name? Who are you with? But there have been things through the CDC and the FDA both, which I think at some times have been dizzying and puzzling for health workers, but at other times have started to move in the direction of understanding that there's a crisis that has emerged and is present. And so under those conditions, there is the need for accommodation of certain policies. And so that has happened at least, but we'll see what happens next. It's still very young and early.
Yeah, I really hope our government can learn from this and engage, figure out, to me, this is a kind of infrastructure that we need, and we need to figure out ways to support it. Well, let me ask if you have questions. Yeah, let me just say one thing just to the audience. If you have questions, just type them in the chat. We'll pass them on. If if you really want to say something, raise your hand and we can bring you onto the panel. But Etta?
Yeah, I was going to say, so I don't know about acknowledgement, but through the outreach that we've been doing at Get Us PPE, we actually have been working with a lot of government individuals. So like state governments and, you know, legislators reaching out and being like, hey, my state needs X, Y, and Z, right? And the interesting thing is like, they are looking to people like us to fill the gap. I think people across the board and like across the government, they recognize that there is a major gap that we as makers and like as this group, not necessarily just Something Labs, right? Like across the country, they're looking to organizations like this because there just isn't another supply. So they are recognizing the importance of organizations like ours.
Great. That's great.
Yeah, and
I
I
mean,
think there are some states that also have funding. So, I mean, it's very limited, but I know like in my state in Maryland, there actually is a fund for manufacturing of PPE, and that includes makers. And actually several of the maker spaces in our area have reached out and had actually been reached out from the governor's office to say you should apply for this. So that's really, really hopeful. And, you know, I hope that other states take suit and, you know, that they continue on.
Yeah, if we could share the language around that, Dorothy, somewhere, I'd like to see that. It's
send that to you.
You know, anyway, it's frustrating sometimes because they'll anyway define it as manufacturing and not some, you know, not the whole thing that's going on here sometimes. But hey, Brian, what are I guess what are you learning from doing this? You know, running a shop, but you know, you're throwing from bicycles to medical equipment, and you know, different tools or different processes you're having to learn to do. What's it like for you?
Yeah, I think I'm learning a lot. I think it's really interesting to go from, you know, it's kind of my personal shop. Do we want, you know, tinker with things, your own pace, to no, now we need to think about really manufacturing, how we can scale something up, you know, fit something to new and iterating really, really quick, you know, especially, you know, one day you're like, great, how can I make a ton of visors? Wait, no, not visors. We need to do PAPRs now. And like just switching gears like that's been really challenging, but also really good too. I think like I said earlier in the call, I think like this is probably the most productive I've been in a while. And I think sometimes that's what happens when, you know, you have this very specific need, you know, everything else kind of goes to the wayside. You don't worry about as much of, you know, expending all your time and design. It's like, no, we need to produce this in the easiest, cheapest, best way possible that fits the need.
Yeah.
You know, when you look, when you have specific goals like that, you get to just zero in on exactly what you need. And when you're working with a great group like this too, I think everyone's of that same mindset, you know, like egos go by the wayside too, I feel like, and everyone's treating each other great, which is awesome to see. Yeah, so I think it's just been a challenge to think about things differently. And also like, you know, gowns are now a thing. And I'm like, wow, I know nothing about making fabrics or wardrobes or particularly out of garbage bags, you know, like, so, you know, it's a whole new sphere, but I think that's what's great too. And I hope that's what we learn out of this, of, you know, how we make things, how we think about this, how we think about government. I don't think, you know, I have a clear picture of what that looks like, but I think we're learning so much right now.
Right.
I can see a future in which we're like, oh, I see how we can change this, how we can make this better, how we can do this differently, whether it's an emergency or not, or what that looks like.
But it's also kind of generalizing for the, you know, fact that someone who's making bicycles has the capacity to make all these other things. And to some degree, a shop is able to do these things. And that's kind of what a makerspace is. And I think this really is not just about, like I said, manufacturing per se. It's having this capacity, or an exhibit design shop at you know, if it could be freed from its institution to do these kinds of things. You know, the makers have developed this capacity, sometimes around hobbies and self-interest, but now it's applied to a public interest, and I think it's really remarkable. One thing I wanted to say, just it's an analogy, maybe not, but since you're from the Bay Area, Steve Kerr, the Golden State Warriors, he talks about his offense, and he calls it a flow offense, and he describes like what he's looking for is how many passes happen each possession, how many times they just throw the ball to each other rather than, you know, who's shooting and things. And I always thought when I heard him talk about that was actually a kind of hidden secret in collaboration and innovation, being able to pass things back and forth. and it causes decision making from lots of people and many decisions to be made rather than, hey Sam, it's your decision, or it's your decision. It's sort of like, well, it kind of moves around a lot. I think it was Sam describing that. It sounds how a lot of the workflow has happened in your group.
It's so many passes.
Yeah.
We were just talking about that today, of like the life of a single face shield is like somebody has to drive an hour and a half to Stockton to grab plastic at Tap Plastic, sometimes bring it to Brian's shop, who cuts it, and then somebody picks it up there to assemble a kit at home, and then we bring it up, and then it gets to a person, and then they deliver it to a hospital, or they bring it back to Yuki, and then they send it, and it finally gets worn on a health worker. And what we've lost in efficiency with the fact that we can't be in one place, and at factories, we have people power right now. A lot of people want to do something, they want to be a part of it. And so there are all these passes. It is, everything takes on the flavor of every person it touches. And then
given Yuki's comment, this is the first time you've seen each other's faces. It's kind of like no look passes.
Yeah. Brian, you have a face. That's great.
We had a question that came in that, do you think this initiative may reach over underdeveloped countries or NGOs such as the IRC International Refugee Committee? So how do you guys think about international engagement?
Yeah, I think Yuki and Etta, you were just working on this. It'd be great to hear from you too.
Yuki, you want to take it?
Sure.
I can comment after.
Yeah, so I do a lot of the distribution side, right? But I am not an expert in distribution. I am an engineering PhD student, and I study waves in the ocean. So I have no idea how to send something to another continent, except for go to the UPS store and ask. So we've been, through all this, making a lot of connections with different organizations that have the capability to ship abroad. And not only to ship abroad, but to have local contacts in these places that we ship it to, so that once it gets to that continent, it can get to the hospital provider there locally, the last mile, we call it. That's something that I've been working on, is reaching out to different partners when we hear of these needs globally. And I think that we are more than happy to make, but getting it over there is a more challenging bit. Ed, I'm sure you have better points than me to make.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like one takeaway is like none of us are experts at what we're doing right now. We're all kind of like, we keep talking about like stopgapping. Like none of us are experts in this. We're all kind of learning as we go. So like, I don't know, there's no better person at distribution than Yuki right now. So like everyone is crushing it. I will say that like a lot of these organizations have formed globally, and Get Us PPE is doing a really good job at making connections within the US, but also starting to get some international affiliates. What we're all realizing is that, this PPE need is not just within the US, and many other places in the world are not going to be able to get it as effectively as we are. And so that poses a really big challenge. And one of the things that we're talking about with Boston Scientific, is a partnership that we have between Get Us PPE and Boston Sci, is how do we start thinking about shipping face shields, maybe other PPE over there once they develop that. So there are groups that are forming. And I think another point to this is, all of the designs that we have within our group are open source. And, Dorothy leading the Nation of Makers, all of their designs are open source. And so, making these connections with the other maker groups internationally so that they can get our designs, and we make it easy enough that anybody can just take it and, do it locally. I mean, our stuff has like every bit of detail that you would need to buy this from whatever place and make it locally. So I think the groups are starting to coalesce, which is like, I guess what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and there's like a whole continuum, right? So like our designs, like Nation Makers, to be clear, doesn't have designs. We are actually partnered with the Open Source Medical Supplies Group, which is a really large 60,000 plus maker group that's actually been vetting and prototyping designs and putting them out there. And then we help to Get Us PPE to put them up on the Get Us PPE site so that makers everywhere can have, access to designs that have been vetted in some way or have that sort of feedback. They get their own Lily in a way, right? So everyone doesn't have a Lily. So So, and there's only one Lily that we can have. So and you guys won't give her up. So she's yours. So we have to, figure out ways to share with each other. And I agree. I think one of the things that's been the most delightful for me to witness is how people have come together. And in a particular, we had the other week, Dale and I had Atlanta Beats COVID on, and it was like 6 different, maker spaces who probably, honestly thought of each other as probably competitors before this, right? And I mean, no one said that, but everybody was working with each other. The same thing in Chicago. Every city we see, the ecosystem has changed, right? And everybody realizes we can do this. We're, all of those, hashtag stronger together. That's really true, right? And that, if we work, hashtag, if we work together, we're better. And so I think that that's really, the beauty of our movement, the beauty of the network, the beauty of something like saying we are a nation of makers is that we all can come together, and maybe each one of us doesn't know everything, but we don't have to, right? Because we can find a knowledge bearer in a different area. And most of us are willing to roll up our sleeves and try to become that knowledge bearer, even if we weren't that person before. So, Yuki, even though you'll go and get a PhD in engineering, you may also be able to know a lot about, supply chain and distribution. And maybe that's something you'll do in the future, and you'll use both of those things. So I think it's really incredible.
Well, I always think, just some way to run the Plan C is the citizen response is the last resort. I mean, we don't have anything else. If this doesn't hold, this line doesn't hold, we just collapse. So, it isn't about expertise. It's actually just willingness to take things on. And I want to thank you for doing something, first of all of you. And I don't know, I think there's a lot to learn from what you've done. And I just want to encourage you to think about that as you get time in the future. Think about how you made this happen. What you did is really important, but how you did it is also a very maker thing, to kind of create what you need when you need it and discard it when it's not useful and move on to something else. Peter?
I just want to say that Sam is utterly instrumental in this whole thing, and that I personally would not have been involved in this if it weren't for Sam's kind of charisma and organizational skills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like he's not the Messiah, but almost, almost,
Oh, well, we'll kind of come to the end on that, but thank you, Peter.
Yeah,
I can't build on that at all, but I know. But I think things like this do require the initiative of individuals to step out, and then they find others that are doing it. I think that's kind of the secret of even DIY is you have to kind of initiate it yourself, and then you find a lot of other people will join you. But but this, it's also that you define distinct roles over time. Etta, what you're doing is just amazing, right? It's just, so essential to do that. And Lily and Angela, all of you, Yuki, thank you, Brian, for all being on this today. Thank you all for attendance. We had a nice group today. We'll put this up on video. And just last thing, if you don't know about it, Virtually Maker. Well, first of all, we're in the week of making this week.
Yes, I was going to say happy
National Week of Making. We have it that has been extended from February to this week, but then Virtually Maker Fair is May 23rd, and encourage anyone here in a session to organize sessions to help train other people, talk about what you're doing in more detail. It's really useful, and I think you may not realize it, but you've learned an awful lot by doing what you've done, and there are others would like to understand how to get started. And one of the big things is when I see the unemployment numbers out there is we have a lot of people that don't know that they can do this kind of thing, and we have to help train them. We have to help bring them on, so we have a broader participation in the solutions that we create and the people we serve. So thank you all. You can do a call for makers is on makerfair.com. You can apply. It's an open call. We'd love to hear from you. Sam, I'll probably bug you, see if you'll do something with us again. But that was a really great presentation. Your photos were amazing too, as a publisher.
Really good
models. Like
models.
those. All right. Thank you, Dorothy, for being here. And thank you all for being part of Plan C Live.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Dale. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
so much for having us.
You're
All right,
amazing.
thanks a
It's been
lot.
a pleasure.
All right.